Every morning now begins the same. I wake up alone. The other side of the bed is cold, undisturbed, just like it's been for the past 5 years. I stretch slowly, not because I'm tired, but because I dread what's coming next. Silence. There was a time not so long ago when I'd be awakened by the faint clink of a spoon stirring sugar into coffee. My wife, Marion, made the best coffee I've ever tasted. 3 scoops, 200 milliliters of water, and just a pinch of salt, her little secret. These days I make it myself. Same steps, same mug, same spot on the counter. It never tastes the same. My name is Harold Lawson. I'm 78 years old, a retired civil servant, and I live alone in a modest one-story house in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. After 43 years of balancing numbers for the city treasury, I retired thinking I'd finally have time to relax, maybe travel with Marion, visit our daughter, play with the grandkids. We made so many plans. But plans are fragile things. A year into retirement, Marion collapsed while watering her garden. Stroke. Sudden. The doctors told me it was quick, painless. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I never found the courage to ask for details. She was my everything. Losing her didn't feel like losing a person. It felt like losing gravity. Like my world lost weight and nothing could keep me grounded anymore. We had one daughter, Ruth. Smart, ambitious, driven. She didn't make it to Marion's funeral. Said she had meetings in Denver that couldn't be moved. Sent flowers instead. A small, forgettable bouquet with a card that read, "With love always, Ruth and Dennis." I remember reading that line over and over, "with love always." Yet she wasn't there. She arrived 3 days after the burial. No tears, no emotion, just a stiff hug and a question. "Dad, are you planning on keeping the house? I mean, it's pretty big for just one person." That was the first time I felt it, the shift in her tone. Not concern, not grief, strategy. Marion used to call Ruth practical. I always found another word more fitting, calculating. That day, for the first time, I said it out loud. "Your mother's not even cold in the ground, and you're already calculating property value." She didn't even flinch, just blinked slowly like I'd spoken in a different language. Ruth didn't stay that night, said she had a hotel booked already. She was gone by morning. We didn't speak again for over a year. I used to think grief was loud, crying in empty rooms, screaming into pillows, pounding fists against the floor. But real grief, it's quiet. It sneaks up on you when you open an old drawer and find her earrings, when you pass the park where she used to sit and sketch flowers, when the coffee just doesn't taste right. Ruth lives 15 minutes away, has for nearly a decade. Her husband, Dennis, is a regional architect, designs overpriced houses for people who barely live in them. They moved here from Seattle when Dennis got hired by some firm with a fancy name and big contracts. At the time, Marion was thrilled. "We'll finally be a family again," she said, glowing. "We'll get Sunday dinners, backyard barbecues, babysitting duties." And for a while we did. Their twins, Mason and Ellie, were 9 when they moved in. Marion loved having them close. She'd bake cookies, help with school projects, even teach them how to fold origami frogs. But slowly, Ruth and Dennis started drifting. Fewer visits, more excuses. "We've got soccer. Dennis has late meetings. We're traveling this weekend." After Marion died, I became useful in a different way, as a wallet. Ruth only reached out when she needed something: tuition fees, home repairs, a new hybrid SUV for Dennis. And I gave, every single time. Why? Because I wanted to believe there was still something left of the family Marion and I had built, and because I was her father. That's what fathers do, even when they know they're being used. 8 months ago, I gave them $50,000, a down payment on a new house in one of those suburban neighborhoods with names like Maple Hollow Estates. Ruth said they'd put me as a co-owner, that it'd make it easier with the bank, and I could visit whenever I liked. I signed the paperwork without really reading it. I trusted her. That was the last time I stepped foot near their home. Calls went unanswered. Texts were met with short, polite replies, if any. Sorry, Dad, busy, talk soon. Can't chat right now, let's catch up next week. Next week never came. Every evening I'd sit in my recliner, listening to the grandfather clock tick down the hours. Sometimes I'd stare at the landline, waiting for it to ring. Other times I'd scroll through old photos, birthdays, road trips, silly selfies with Marion in front of gas stations. We were happy, truly. Then one morning, everything changed. It was just after 7 a.m., on a cloudy Tuesday when the phone rang. An old landline, beige, wall-mounted, the kind that echoes. I froze. Nobody calls that phone, not unless it's bad news. My heart ticked like a metronome as I reached for the receiver. Hi, Dad, it's Ruth. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 8 months. It sounded dry, tired, practiced, like someone calling out of obligation, not affection. We were thinking about taking a short trip out to the coast next month, she continued. Maine, just for a couple of weeks. Dennis booked a cottage near the water. It's got 3 bedrooms, an ocean view, a little porch. Thought you might want to come with us. I blinked. My first instinct, suspicion. Ruth doesn't do spontaneous generosity. For 5 years I hadn't been invited to a single family outing, not even a lunch. And now suddenly 2 weeks on the coast. That's kind of you, I said cautiously. What brought this on? Well, you hardly go anywhere, she said, her tone tightening. You need to get out of the house. Some fresh air will do you good. Maybe she was right. I'd become a ghost of myself since Marion passed. I rarely went out beyond the grocery store or a nearby park. But the way Ruth said it, like she was checking a box on a to-do list, didn't sit right. Okay, I said after a long pause. Thank you for the invitation. Great, be ready by 8 a.m. on the 10th. Pack light, just your passport, credit card, a few clothes, meds. Everything else is covered. We'll pick you up. She hung up before I could even say goodbye. I set the phone down slowly. Something in her voice had felt rehearsed, like she was reading off a script. My instincts buzzed, but I silenced them. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe this was Ruth's awkward way of reaching out. A reset. For the next 3 weeks I prepared. I cleaned the house, packed neatly, made a list of my medications, and tucked $1,000 in cash into an envelope just in case. I told myself this was a chance, a real family vacation, a chance to bond with Ruth again, maybe even see Mason and Ellie, though I hadn't heard from them in 3 years. On the day of departure, I was up before sunrise, showered, shaved, dressed in my best pants and a freshly ironed shirt. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, I sat by the window waiting. The clock ticked. The driveway stayed empty. At 9:30, I began to think maybe they'd changed their minds. Then finally, the crunch of tires on gravel. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. Ruth stepped out, dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, beige pantsuit, flawless makeup, not a single hair out of place. Dennis stayed behind the wheel, engine idling. Ruth walked into the house without knocking. Traffic was murder, she said, not meeting my eyes. You ready? I've been ready for over an hour, I said, gesturing to my suitcase. She glanced at my pants. Please tell me you're not riding in those. What's wrong with them? I asked, surprised. They're clean. She rolled her eyes. That same teenage gesture I remembered from 20 years ago. They look like you bought them in 1972. Maybe I did, I replied, forcing a smile. Back when people had taste. She snorted and snatched my suitcase without another word. When I reached the SUV, Dennis didn't look up from the wheel. I climbed into the back seat and greeted him. Good morning, Dennis. He grunted. Ruth slid into the passenger seat and glanced at her watch. It's about an 18-hour drive, she said. We'll stop for the night halfway. I watched my home, my quiet, dusty, memory-filled home, shrink in the rearview mirror. My chest tightened. For a moment, I wondered if I'd ever see it again. The first few hours passed in near total silence. I stared at fields and gas stations, at truck stops and roadside diners. Ruth typed on her phone constantly, occasionally showing something to Dennis, whispering in low tones. "How are the twins?" I asked at one point just to break the quiet. "They're fine," she said without looking up. "Busy with college, Mason's pre-med. Ellie has a boyfriend now, some musician." I smiled gently. "Do they ask about me?" She didn't answer. When I offered to buy them lunch at a rest stop, Ruth rolled her eyes again. "We just left 3 hours ago, Dad. We'll eat later." "Sorry, just thought it'd be nice." "You always get tired too early," Dennis added from the front seat. "You'll need your energy." They pulled into a restaurant in Minneapolis around 4 p.m. Some trendy fusion place where the menus didn't have prices and the waiters wore ties. Ruth insisted I leave my jacket in the car. "They have a dress code," she said. "Don't embarrass yourself." At the table they ordered for me. "Fish. Too risky," they said. "Get the pasta." "Wine." "No, your blood pressure. Cut your noodles into small pieces, Dad. You always make a mess." And I sat there, red-faced, chewing overcooked pasta, feeling more like a burden than a guest. That night they booked me a separate room in a roadside motel, said I needed rest, said they'd catch up in the bar across the street. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the peeling wallpaper, wondering why I came, wondering what exactly I had hoped to find. The next morning came too soon. A sharp knock on the door jolted me awake. "Dad, we're leaving in 30 minutes. Be ready." It was Ruth, voice crisp and commanding like a drill sergeant. I splashed cold water on my face, dressed, and stepped outside. Dennis was already behind the wheel, fingers tapping the steering wheel like he had somewhere better to be. "Good morning," I said as I climbed into the back seat. He muttered. Ruth handed me a paper bag. Breakfast, coffee, and a cinnamon roll. It was cold and stale. Still, I forced it down. Maybe this was just their way. Not everyone knows how to be gentle with age. I reminded myself of that. We drove for hours that day. They didn't play music. They didn't speak to me. Occasionally, they whispered to each other in hushed tones, pointing at things on Ruth's phone. When I asked to stop for the restroom, Dennis sighed so loudly it filled the whole car. I started counting silences like they were miles. By evening we pulled into Kennebunkport. The cottage was big, beautiful, even. White porch, flower beds, ocean view. Ruth handed me a key without ceremony. "You're upstairs, last door on the right." I dragged my suitcase up the stairs by myself. No offer to help. My room was the smallest, with a view of the neighbor's garage and a bed that creaked when I sat on it. I unpacked slowly, trying not to feel disappointed. After all, I was here. That meant something. Right. Dinner was served on the patio, pasta and salad again. They sipped wine. I was given water. "Dennis and I are going to a wine tasting tomorrow," Ruth announced. "You'll probably want to stay and rest." It wasn't a question. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to join. I can skip the tasting, but I'd love to see the vineyard." They exchanged glances. "Dad," Ruth said gently, "it's a long walk. The tickets were pre-booked. It's probably best you relax here." I nodded, pretending to understand, but something inside me sank. The next day they left early. I stood by the window and watched their car disappear down the road. I spent the day wandering the empty beach, trying to fill the silence with thoughts of Marion. She would have loved this place. She used to say the ocean made her feel young again. We never made it to the coast together. That night they returned after sunset, sunburned and laughing. I asked how the tasting went. Ruth said it was heaven. Dennis said, "You wouldn't have kept up anyway." I didn't reply. Day after day passed like that. They went out, yacht tour, golf, long lunches in town. I stayed behind, reading outdated magazines, walking alone along the water, fixing myself cold sandwiches from the fridge. Each night they returned later. Each morning they left earlier. On the fourth evening, Ruth said we were all going out for dinner. "It's a really fancy place, Daddy," she said. "You should wear something decent." I put on my best suit, the same one I wore to Marion's funeral. It hung off my shoulders now, loose from the weight I'd lost over the years. When I came downstairs, Ruth frowned. "That's your funeral suit." "Yes," I said, "it is." Dennis chuckled. "Well, at least it's black. Can't tell how old it is in the dark." The restaurant overlooked the sea, lit by candles and the sound of distant waves. Everyone looked like they belonged, polished, tailored, moneyed. I felt like a museum exhibit someone had dragged out from storage. We sat at a window table. Ruth ordered for me again. "He'll have the steamed fish. No salt and vegetables." I tried to protest, but the waiter was already gone. "Dad," Ruth whispered, "don't make a scene." Dennis raised his phone. "Smile, the twins want a photo of all of us." I forced a smile. Click. "Another one, you looked stiff," he said. I excused myself and walked to the restroom. In the mirror, I saw a man I barely recognized, sagging cheeks, tired eyes, suit too big for his bones. When did I become a ghost in my own story? When I returned to the table, Ruth and Dennis were deep in conversation with a couple nearby, Elizabeth and Richard, both around Ruth's age, dressed in the kind of expensive casual that screams wealth. "Ah, Papa," Ruth said brightly, "meet Elizabeth and Richard. They're also vacationing here. We were just telling them how we brought you out so you wouldn't be alone." Elizabeth smiled politely. "That's so thoughtful. My dad refuses to travel, says he's too set in his ways." "Ours is a little forgetful," Ruth said, patting my hand. "Needs looking after. Like the other day, almost poured himself a glass of whiskey with his blood pressure." That was a lie. I hadn't touched whiskey in years, and my blood pressure was fine. "Also left the stove on last week," she added with a chuckle. "That's not true," I said quietly. "Dad," she whispered tight-lipped, "don't start." Elizabeth and Richard nodded, fake smiles glued to their faces. I excused myself again and walked out of the restaurant altogether, down to the boardwalk. The ocean breeze slapped my face. I gripped the railing and stared out at the black water. They were painting me as incompetent, senile, like I was a burden. Why? Why lie about my health? Why make up stories about me being forgetful? Unless this was never a vacation. Unless this was the setup. They'd brought me all this way, isolated me, made me look feeble for something. And I had a sinking feeling, I knew exactly what. The realization settled over me like fog, heavy, clinging to the skin, impossible to shake. This wasn't just a trip. This wasn't about fresh air or family bonding. Ruth and Dennis had brought me here with a purpose I hadn't seen, until now. That night when I returned to the cottage, the lights were dim. I crept upstairs without a word, locked my door and sat on the edge of the bed for hours thinking, listening. Somewhere in the silence below, I could hear their voices, muffled, low, plodding. By morning they were gone, again. A note waited for me on the kitchen table in Ruth's tidy script. "Dad, Dennis and I are doing a field trip to a nearby town. Be back late. Sandwiches in the fridge. Don't miss us. R." Something about that note chilled me. Not an ounce of guilt. Not even a passing reference to the awkward dinner the night before. It was as if none of it had happened. I opened the fridge. 2 sandwiches sat on a plate wrapped neatly in plastic. I wasn't hungry. I needed air. I needed to think. I changed, grabbed my wallet and walked toward the beach. The sky was clear, the breeze cool. Seagulls dipped over the waves and the saltwater smell clung to my clothes. I sat on a bench, watched the tide roll in and tried to make sense of everything. That's when I noticed something wrong. My wallet felt light. I checked inside, the cash envelope was still there, all $1,000, but my credit card was gone. I emptied every compartment, turned the wallet upside down, shook it out on my lap. Nothing. It had been there when I left the cottage earlier that morning. That meant it had vanished sometime in the night. I stood up slowly. My heart beat faster. I knew without question what had happened. Either Ruth or Dennis, maybe both, had gone through my things while I slept. Maybe they were looking for more, or maybe they'd already taken something else. I rushed back to the cottage and flung open my suitcase. Everything looked untouched, but I'm not a fool. I know how things are when I leave them. The shirt stack was slightly off. My socks weren't folded the same, and my passport, once hidden neatly in a zipped inner pocket, had been moved. It now lay buried under a pile of clothes. They had it. They had my ID, my credit card, my passport. And they were gone. The panic rose quickly, choking me. I was 1,000 miles from home, in an unfamiliar town with no means of getting back, not without help, not without identification. But this time, I wasn't going to panic. I wasn't going to play the role of the confused old man they were trying to write me into. I grabbed a tourist map from the cottage hallway, one of those glossy brochures with smiling couples and happy kids, and studied it carefully. There was a visitor center in town, maybe 2 miles away. I packed what I could into a small travel bag, took the key to the house, and left. I walked with purpose, each step steadier than the last. At the visitor center, a young woman greeted me with a smile. "How can I help you, sir?" "I need to get back to Sioux Falls, South Dakota," I said. "What's the fastest way?" She blinked. "That's quite a distance." "I know, but I'm stranded. I need to get home." She explained that I'd have to first get to Portland, then fly to Minneapolis, then transfer to Sioux Falls. That was the quickest route. Flights would be expensive, nearly $800 just to Minneapolis. My heart sank. "Any other way?" I asked. "You could take the bus. Portland to Chicago, then Chicago to Sioux Falls. It'll take a few days, but it's cheaper." I nodded. "I'll take it." "Do you have ID?" she asked. That's when I remembered my driver's license. I'd stopped using it years ago, but I still carried it. I handed it over. She nodded. "Perfect, that'll do." I bought the bus ticket, $230, and found a cafe nearby to wait out the hours before departure. I sat there, coffee in hand, staring into the steam, finally letting it all catch up to me. They had abandoned me. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, had taken me far from home, stolen my documents, and left me with barely enough to survive. Not because I was ill, not because they were afraid, but because they wanted something, something they couldn't get while I was in control. Money, power of attorney, guardianship, maybe access to my accounts. Whatever the plan had been, my refusal to crumble at dinner had thrown them off course. They panicked. So they ran. But they underestimated me. They thought I was slow, old, helpless. They forgot something critical. I wasn't just a father or a grandfather. I was a man who'd spent a lifetime solving problems, quietly, without fanfare, with precision. This wasn't over. When the bus rolled into Portland, I didn't stop. I went straight to the airport, confirmed the next flights, too expensive, but that was fine. I had another plan. The moment the bus pulled out of Portland that night, bound for Chicago, I sat back, opened a small notepad from my bag, and started writing. My plan wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be patient, legal, and final. They thought they could erase me. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed. After that long bus ride, the wheels of my plan began to turn steadily. I had survived the initial betrayal. Now it was time to take control. Back in Sioux Falls, I made my first stop, the bank. Elena, my longtime account manager greeted me with surprise. "Mr. Lawson, we've been trying to reach you about your card." I told her the truth. My daughter and son-in-law had taken my credit card without my knowledge and left me stranded. Elena's eyes widened. "That's serious. We need to block the card immediately and review recent transactions." As we examined my account history, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. There were large withdrawals in Portland, thousands of dollars gone in days. Attempts to transfer tens of thousands to their account, some blocked by daily limits. They hadn't just left me, they were draining my savings. "I want full control over my accounts," I said firmly. "No one else can access them." Elena promised to lock everything down and reissue new cards with new numbers. Next, I visited Martin, my trusted lawyer, the same man who'd handled our house deeds years ago. "Martin," I said, "I'm a co-owner of Ruth and Dennis's house, but I want out. I want to sell my share." He looked at me carefully. "You have every right, Harold. You own 1/3 of that property. You can force a sale, though it might take time and legal steps if the others don't agree." This was good news. "What about their car, the red SUV in my garage?" "Co-ownership there too," he replied. "Selling without their consent is tricky, but if it's been parked unused for over 6 months, you might claim it as abandoned property." That was my next move. Back at home, I inspected the SUV. Dust coated its sleek red frame. It had been there untouched for over a year. I filed the abandoned property claim with the Department of Motor Vehicles and started the paperwork. Then I returned to the bank to check on a joint account I'd opened with Ruth years ago, back when she was in college. It was a convenience then, but I'd kept putting money in without ever closing it. Elena pulled up the balance, nearly $27,000. "I want to close this account and transfer everything to my personal account." She warned me Ruth could contest it. "Let her try," I said. Over the next weeks, I coordinated with the realtor Martin recommended, Veronica Page, a sharp woman with years of experience. She inspected the house, assessed its value at around $700,000. My share, approximately $230,000. "I'll draft the notice to Ruth and Dennis about your intention to sell," Veronica said. "They'll have 30 days to respond." I signed the paperwork without hesitation. Throughout the process, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Every step severed ties that had long since felt like chains. Selling the SUV went smoothly. The dealership offered $42,000 less than purchase price, but a fair deal. I took the check and deposited it immediately. Life felt like a slow reclaiming of my dignity. The final blow came when the court accepted my petition to force the sale of the house after Ruth and Dennis refused to cooperate. They tried to fight back with fake medical reports claiming early dementia, an attempt to declare me incompetent. But independent doctors found me perfectly sound, sharp as ever. The judge ruled in my favor. The house would be sold, the SUV was gone, the account secured. For the first time in years, I felt free. Weeks passed after the court's decision, and the tension finally reached its peak. One clear afternoon, I was walking back from the cafe when a black SUV screeched to a halt just ahead. The door flew open, and there she was, Ruth, her face flushed and eyes red-rimmed, anger radiating from every inch of her. Dennis followed more slowly, his jaw clenched and glare sharp enough to cut glass. "How could you?" Ruth spat the words like venom. "You sold our house, took our car, stole our money." I took a step back, surprised at the raw fury, but I was calm. "It was mine too," I said quietly. "I paid for 1/3 of everything, and after you left me alone in Maine without a word, I decided it was time to take back what's mine." Ruth's breath hitched. The crowd around us began to notice. Passers-by paused, their curious eyes fixed on our heated exchange. "Let's find somewhere private," I suggested, voice steady. "This isn't for the street." She agreed reluctantly, and we found a small cafe nearby. The air between us was thick with years of unspoken grievances. At the table, Ruth erupted. "We took care of you." "Took care?" I scoffed. "You left me stranded thousands of miles from home, took my credit card and passport, tried to make me look like a helpless old man." Dennis leaned forward, voice low and cold. "You think this is just about money. It's about control. You've been difficult for years." "I was your father," I shot back. "Not an ATM machine, not a project." Ruth's eyes shimmered with tears, or was it rage? I couldn't tell. "You never listened. You ignored Mom's suffering. She told me how unhappy she was." Her words stabbed deeper than any legal battle. "That's a lie," I whispered. "Your mother loved me. We had our struggles, yes, but love was there. You're trying to break me where it hurts." The room seemed to shrink around us. She stood abruptly. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "One day you'll be alone, truly alone, and you'll understand what you lost." I watched her leave, the sting of her words lingering. But for the first time in years, I felt a strange peace. I was no longer alone, in the shadows of neglect. I had reclaimed my life. After that confrontation, a calm settled over me, not the chaotic silence of before, but a quiet acceptance. I moved out of my old house, leaving behind decades of memories, the laughter, the love, the losses. I found a small apartment on the quieter side of town, near a park and a lake. It was modest but bright, and for the first time in years I felt like it could be a fresh start. The landlord, a kind man named Silas, was skeptical at first about renting to someone my age, but when he saw my resolve, he smiled warmly. "You look stronger than most half your age," he said. I promised I wouldn't be a bother. I packed only essentials, a few clothes, some books, pictures of Marion, and my old computer. I changed my phone number, email, even my mailing address, closing the door on the past and sealing the silence with new locks. No more calls from Ruth. No more unanswered messages on the old landline. Freedom came with a price, but it was mine. I spent days walking by the lake, sipping tea by the window, and savoring the simple joy of being in control of my own life again. The bank called with updates on the joint account closure. The realtor sent word that the house sale was finalized. The check cleared. But it wasn't about the money. It was about justice, about reclaiming dignity, about proving to myself that I was more than the sum of neglect and betrayal. I may have lost a family, but I found myself. And for now, that was enough. Life after the storm felt surreal. The house was sold, the car gone, the account secured. The legal battles behind me, the emotional scars still raw but healing. Neighbors who once greeted me with polite nods now saw a man renewed, someone who had stood up for himself against overwhelming odds. Every morning, I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the ritual Marion had taught me so many years ago. The smell was still different, but it was mine to enjoy. I kept a few photos of Marion and the grandchildren on my windowsill, reminders of happier times, of love that had once filled these bones with hope. Sometimes, when the sky painted the lake gold, I allowed myself to think of Ruth and Dennis. Not with bitterness, but with sadness. How had things gone so wrong? Where had the warmth turned cold? I don't know if reconciliation is possible anymore. But I do know this: I am whole. I am free. And in this new chapter, I write my own story. One where I am not forgotten, not used, not invisible. With the past behind me, I focused on rebuilding my life, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I joined a local community center for seniors, where I found companionship in unexpected places. We played chess, shared stories, and even started a book club. It was the first time in years I felt part of something. Technology, once intimidating, became my friend. I learned to video call the grandchildren, even if Ruth rarely allowed it, but hearing their voices brought comfort. I planted flowers on my small balcony, geraniums and daisies, and tended them as I once tended Marion's garden. Each petal reminded me that life could bloom again, even after winter's harshest frost. I began volunteering at a nearby library, helping others learn to use computers and access information. It gave me purpose and a sense of connection beyond my own walls. Sometimes loneliness crept in like a shadow, but now I met it with resilience instead of despair. My apartment became a sanctuary, filled with new memories, laughter with new friends, and quiet moments of reflection. I was no longer the father abandoned, the old man forgotten. I was Harold, a man who endured, who fought back, and who found peace on his own terms. Years have passed since I took back control of my life. I no longer wait for calls that never come or invitations that never arrive. Instead, I wake up each day with purpose and gratitude. I visit the lake each morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in colors only nature can create. Friends from the community center have become family, sharing birthdays, holidays, and stories late into the night. I've learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who show up, who care, who listen. Though my relationship with Ruth remains distant and fractured, I've made peace with the past. Forgiveness, I realize, is not for them, it's for me. For the freedom to move forward without bitterness. The house, the car, the money, they were never the real treasures. The real treasure was reclaiming my dignity, my independence, my voice. I am no longer the man left alone in the middle of a trip. I am the man who walked away with his head held high. And this is only the beginning. The days after that confrontation were filled with a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Ruth's words echoed in my mind, threats of loneliness, regret, and lost time. But I knew the truth was far more complicated. Years of neglect and silence had built walls that neither of us seemed willing or able to tear down. I realized then that family, at least the one I had known, was no longer a safe place for me. I began to settle into my new apartment with a sense of cautious optimism. The old house, with its creaky floors and faded wallpaper, had become a museum of memories I wasn't ready to revisit. Here, in this smaller space with sunlight pouring through the windows, I could breathe again. The fresh start was both terrifying and exhilarating. Neighbors greeted me with friendly nods and occasional smiles, but none knew the full story of my past. I kept my history to myself, sharing only what was necessary. It was a relief to be just Harold, no longer the man tied down by betrayal and broken promises. The loneliness came in waves, especially in the quiet evenings when the silence pressed in on me. But I found ways to fill those moments, a book here, a walk by the lake there. I even started attending a local community center, where other seniors gathered to play cards, share stories, or just enjoy each other's company. It wasn't a replacement for family, but it was a connection, a reminder that I wasn't invisible. Technology, once a source of frustration, slowly became a bridge. I learned to use a tablet, join video calls with distant relatives, and even managed to catch glimpses of my grandchildren's lives through a screen. Ruth's control over those interactions was tight, but hearing Mason's laughter or Ellie's voice, even briefly, warmed my heart more than I expected. Each new day was a quiet battle for peace. The memories of Marion, the love we shared, and the dreams that once seemed within reach, these lived in my heart, guiding me forward. I planted flowers on my balcony, tended them carefully, watching life bloom where once there was only sorrow. It was a small act of hope. And slowly, I began to understand that life wasn't about clinging to what was lost, but about embracing what still could be. I wasn't the man abandoned on that trip anymore. I was the man who reclaimed his dignity, who stood firm against betrayal, and who chose to live on his own terms. No matter what the future held, I knew one thing for certain: my story was far from over. I started to rebuild my life one small step at a time. The first thing I did was close the joint bank account Ruth and I shared. It took some effort, but with the help of Elena at the bank, I managed to transfer the remaining funds into my personal account. That money was mine. After years of silently giving, I was finally taking it back. Next, I filed the paperwork to claim the red SUV that had sat unused in my garage for over a year. The Department of Motor Vehicles accepted my abandoned property claim, and within a month, I was free to sell the car. The dealer offered me a fair price, and I walked away with a check in hand. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming control over what had been used against me. I contacted the realtor Martin recommended and began the process of selling my share of the house. Veronica was thorough and professional, arranging inspections and coordinating with the other owners. I waited patiently as the legal notices went out, knowing that Ruth and Dennis would resist. They did not respond to the formal notifications, forcing us to initiate court proceedings. The court battle was draining but necessary. Ruth and Dennis tried to declare me incompetent, submitting fake medical documents claiming I suffered from early dementia. I agreed to independent medical examinations, confident in my mind and memory. 3 specialists confirmed I was fully competent, and the judge ruled in my favor. The forced sale of the house was approved, and soon after the property was sold. With each victory, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The house was no longer a prison of painful memories, but a chapter closed. Ruth and Dennis' anger was palpable when they learned the sale was finalized. They threatened to appeal and made accusations, but I stayed calm. The law was on my side, and so was the truth. I moved into my new apartment shortly after. It was small but cozy, a place I could truly call my own. I left behind the old furniture, the photos, and the echoes of the past. What I kept were the essentials: clothes, books, pictures of Marion, and a few cherished possessions. I changed my phone number and email, cutting ties with the past completely. Days turned into weeks. I joined the community center and found solace in new friendships. The loneliness never fully disappeared, but it became manageable. I planted flowers on my balcony and tended them with care, a symbol of my new beginning. I reconnected with the grandchildren through video calls whenever possible, holding onto those small moments of joy. Though the pain of betrayal lingered, I learned to accept that some wounds heal slowly or never fully heal. Forgiveness wasn't for Ruth or Dennis, it was for me. Letting go of bitterness allowed me to find peace. Now I wake each morning with gratitude. I watch the sun rise over the lake, sip my coffee slowly, and remember that I am no longer the man left alone in the middle of a trip. I am a man who fought back, who reclaimed his life, and who continues to write his story on his own terms. Months passed quietly after the house was sold. I settled into my new routine, embracing the small pleasures I'd long forgotten. Mornings were for coffee and crossword puzzles, afternoons for walks by the lake, and evenings spent reading or listening to music. The weight of years lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism I hadn't felt in a long time. Occasionally, I thought about Ruth and Dennis. Their faces would come unbidden to mind, angry, hurt, bitter. But I no longer felt anger. Instead, a quiet sadness settled in its place. What had once been family had fractured beyond repair. I realized that some wounds, no matter how deep, must be accepted as part of life's course. I kept photographs of Marion on the windowsill, a reminder of love and happiness that once filled my days. The grandchildren's pictures were there too, small faces frozen in time, connecting me to a past I cherished but could no longer reach. New friends at the community center became a source of support and laughter. We shared stories, played cards, and celebrated birthdays together. These bonds, though different from family ties, brought warmth to my days, and a sense of belonging I hadn't known I was missing. Technology remained a bridge. I learned to navigate video calls and emails, connecting with distant relatives and, occasionally, the grandchildren. Ruth rarely facilitated these moments, but when they came, I held onto them dearly. Though the scars of betrayal remained, I found strength in my independence. Each day was a testament to resilience, to surviving hardship and reclaiming dignity. I was no longer the man abandoned in a strange town, helpless and lost. I was Harold, whole, capable, and free. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years it felt filled with possibility. And that was enough. Seasons changed outside my window as I continued to build this new life. I discovered simple joys, sitting on a bench watching children play in the park, joining neighborhood potlucks, and volunteering at the local library. These small moments stitched together a patchwork of belonging I hadn't felt in years. Some days, memories of the past surged unexpectedly. I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to call Ruth or imagining Marion's laughter echoing through the house. But instead of sinking into despair, I acknowledged those feelings and let them pass like clouds drifting across a clear sky. I found peace in routines, morning walks along the lakeshore, tending to the garden on my balcony, and writing letters I never sent. My world, once small and confined by pain, grew again in quiet, steady ways. I knew the wounds of family betrayal might never fully heal, but I was no longer defined by them. Instead, I was defined by my resilience, my choices, and the life I was creating day by day. Though I remained alone, I was no longer lonely. The love I carried for Marion and the memories of the family I once had were treasures I held close, but they did not hold me back. With each sunrise, I embraced the promise of a new beginning, one where I walked forward with strength, grace, and the freedom to write the rest of my story on my own terms. Time passed, and with it came unexpected moments of joy. I began to reconnect with old friends and even made a few new ones. We shared meals, laughter, and stories that reminded me life still held warmth and companionship. These connections helped fill the emptiness left by those who had walked away. Occasionally, Ruth's name surfaced in my thoughts, not with bitterness, but with a quiet understanding of the complexities of human relationships. I recognized that we were both shaped by pain, fear, and unspoken regrets. I learned to let go of what I could not change and focus on what lay ahead. My health, though not perfect, improved with daily walks and regular visits to the doctor. I took better care of myself, as Marion would have wanted. Her memory became a source of strength rather than sorrow, guiding me toward acceptance and peace. I continued to write in my journal, capturing my thoughts and reflections. Sometimes, I imagined sharing my story with others who might find solace in knowing they were not alone. The act of writing became healing, a way to honor the past while embracing the future. In this new chapter, I discovered that life's worth is not measured by possessions or proximity to family, but by the courage to face adversity, the grace to forgive, and the willingness to seek happiness anew. I was no longer the man left behind. I was the man who chose to move forward. And that made all the difference. Years unfolded gently after that. I found comfort in small rituals, morning coffee brewed just right, the soft rustle of pages turning in a good book, the steady rhythm of my daily walks along quiet streets. The apartment, once unfamiliar, grew warm with memories I chose to create rather than recall. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling at the memories of Marion, her kindness, her laughter, the way she made our house a home. I held onto those moments like precious stones, each one grounding me in a sense of love that had never truly left. The community I built around me became my new family. We celebrated holidays together, shared meals, and lent each other support in times of need. I realized that connection, in whatever form it takes, is vital for the soul. Though the chapters of pain and betrayal remained part of my story, they no longer defined the man I was becoming. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my future. Each sunrise now carried a promise, not of what was lost, but of what could still be. And with that promise, I moved forward, ready to face whatever came next with hope and strength. The years that followed brought with them a quiet transformation, subtle but profound. Life no longer felt like a series of losses and betrayals, but instead unfolded as a gradual rediscovery of purpose and peace. I settled fully into my new routine, embracing the rhythm of days that were my own to shape. Mornings began with a ritual that had become sacred, the slow, deliberate brewing of coffee, just as Marian had taught me. The aroma filled my small kitchen, and though it never quite matched the warmth she created with her hands, it reminded me of love's enduring presence. Sitting by the window, watching sunlight filter through the leaves of a tree outside, I felt a connection to the world that was both grounding and hopeful. In the afternoons, I ventured out for walks along the lakeshore near my apartment. The crisp air, the gentle lap of water against the shore, and the chorus of birdsong became a balm for my spirit. I greeted neighbors with a nod or a smile, some of whom had become friends. We exchanged stories of our pasts and dreams for the future, reminding me that connection transcends history or blood. The community center became a second home. There, surrounded by others who had faced their own struggles and triumphs, I found laughter and companionship. We played cards, shared meals, and even formed a book club. Reading aloud and discussing stories brought lightness to my days and reminded me that even in later years, new chapters could be written. Technology, once a source of frustration and alienation, transformed into a bridge. I learned to navigate video calls, reaching out to distant relatives, and occasionally hearing the laughter of grandchildren whose faces appeared on glowing screens. These moments, though fleeting and often controlled by Ruth, became treasures I held close, a testament to the enduring threads of family, however fragile. At night, I would write in my journal, pouring thoughts and memories onto paper. It became a sanctuary where I could confront pain and betrayal without judgment, where hopes and regrets mingled freely. Writing helped me to reclaim my narrative, turning a story once marked by abandonment into one defined by resilience and renewal. The pain of Ruth's rejection and the deception of Dennis faded gradually, replaced by a steady sense of self-worth and independence. I understood that forgiveness was not a gift for those who had wronged me, but a release for my own heart, a way to move beyond bitterness and find serenity. Health challenges appeared with age, of course, but I faced them with determination and care. Regular checkups, modest exercise, and a balanced diet became part of my commitment to living fully and with dignity. Marian's memory was a guiding light in this journey, reminding me that caring for oneself is an act of love for oneself and for those who remain in our hearts. Socially, my world expanded in unexpected ways. I volunteered at the local library, helping others learn to use computers and access information. The sense of purpose and contribution reignited a spark that had dimmed during years of isolation and grief. I discovered that even small acts of kindness and service could build bridges and heal wounds. Although my relationship with Ruth remained distant and strained, I held onto the hope that time might soften walls and open doors. Yet, I no longer depended on reconciliation for my happiness. I had learned that peace comes from within, from accepting life's imperfections and embracing the freedom to write new stories. Looking back, I saw a path marked by hardship but also by courage, the courage to face betrayal, to reclaim what was mine, and to rebuild from the ruins. I was no longer the man left alone in the middle of a trip, abandoned and forgotten. I was a man reborn, standing tall on the foundation of his own strength. The sun would rise again tomorrow, and with it, new possibilities. I was ready to meet them, heart open and spirit unbroken, writing the rest of my life story with quiet determination and hope. The steady passage of time brought with it not only healing but unexpected growth. As seasons changed outside my window, so too did the landscape of my inner world. I found myself embracing life with a renewed sense of curiosity and gratitude, qualities that had long been buried beneath years of loss and mistrust. One particularly vivid memory stands out: a chilly autumn afternoon when I ventured farther than usual on my walk by the lake. The leaves had turned fiery shades of orange and crimson, swirling gently in the breeze. I paused on a wooden bench overlooking the water, watching as a group of children chased one another, their laughter bubbling through the crisp air. It was in that moment I realized something profound. Life, despite all its hardships, was still full of joy and wonder if you chose to see it. Around that time, I also began to write more deliberately, not just in my journal but letters. Letters to no one in particular, words I needed to say aloud if only to myself. I wrote about Marion, the love we shared, and the life we had dreamed of building together. I wrote about Ruth and Dennis, not with anger but with honest reflection. About how their actions had hurt me deeply, but how I was learning to forgive, not for their sake but for my own peace. The process was slow, sometimes painful, but it helped me untangle the knots of resentment that had wrapped around my heart. I wrote about hope and resilience, about the small victories that kept me going. And through these words, I discovered a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice of strength, compassion, and quiet defiance. Socially, my world broadened as well. The community center became a sanctuary where I formed friendships that transcended age and circumstance. We shared meals, stories, and experiences that knit us together into a makeshift family. These connections reminded me that family is not always defined by blood or history, but by presence and kindness. Technology, once daunting and cold, became a tool for connection. I learned to navigate video calls and emails, sometimes joining virtual gatherings with distant relatives, and occasionally catching glimpses of my grandchildren's lives. Those moments were bittersweet, fleeting, often filtered through the barrier of Ruth's cautious oversight, but precious nonetheless. Health-wise, I remained vigilant. The years had slowed me down, but I was determined to stay as active and engaged as possible. Regular visits to the doctor, walks in the fresh air, and the tender care I gave to my little balcony garden became symbols of my commitment to life. The garden itself flourished, much like I did. Geraniums, daisies, and small herbs sprouted vibrant leaves and blossoms, their resilience mirroring my own. Tending to them brought a sense of peace and accomplishment. Watching life grow in those small pots became a daily meditation on renewal and hope. At times, loneliness still crept in like a shadow, especially in the quiet moments when memories surged unexpectedly. But rather than retreating into sorrow, I met those feelings head-on, allowing myself to feel, to mourn, and then to gently release. Looking back over the journey, I see a tapestry woven with threads of pain and triumph, loss and rediscovery. I was no longer a man abandoned, powerless, or forgotten. I was a man who faced betrayal, who reclaimed his dignity, and who found peace not by changing the past but by embracing the future. And so, as the sun rose on each new day, I moved forward with quiet confidence, ready to write the next chapters of my life with grace, strength, and an open heart, a story not defined by what I lost, but by what I chose to become. With each passing day, I grew stronger in ways I hadn't expected. The weight of the past no longer pressed down on me like a heavy fog, but settled into the background, a distant memory that no longer controlled my every thought. I began to see possibilities where before there had only been walls. I reconnected with old hobbies I had long forgotten. Woodworking, something Marion had encouraged me to try years ago but I never fully pursued, became a new outlet for my energy and creativity. The smell of sawdust and the rhythm of carving wood brought a calmness that soothed my restless mind. Slowly, small projects took shape: a simple birdhouse, a wooden frame, a hand-carved box, each one a tangible reminder of my ability to create and nurture. Friends at the community center became confidants, and our conversations often drifted towards stories of love, loss, and resilience. We shared not just words but moments of vulnerability and strength. These bonds formed a fabric of support that made the loneliness less daunting. Technology, once a barrier, turned into a window. I embraced it more fully, learning to use social media cautiously, sending messages to distant cousins, and even sharing photos of my woodworking projects and balcony garden. The feedback, simple as it was, brought a sense of belonging and pride. Sometimes Ruth's absence was a hollow ache, but I chose not to dwell on what could have been. Instead, I focused on what was, the friendships I cultivated, the quiet victories of daily life, and the freedom to live authentically on my own terms. Health challenges emerged as they inevitably do with age, but I faced them with dignity and resolve. I scheduled regular checkups, embraced a gentle exercise routine, and found comfort in meditation and mindfulness. Each breath became a reminder of my resilience. I traveled modestly, short trips to nearby towns and visits to nature preserves, each journey a small adventure, a reclaiming of freedom that had been stolen from me. The world, once shrinking in the wake of betrayal, expanded before my eyes. The past, with all its shadows, did not disappear, but it no longer defined the man I was. I had learned to live in the light of the present, cultivating peace where there was once pain. And in this new chapter, I walked forward with a steady heart, ready to face whatever came next with courage, grace, and an unwavering spirit. Months turned into years, and with them came a profound sense of quiet contentment. I found myself savoring moments I once took for granted, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, the golden hues of sunset reflecting off the lake, the soft murmur of conversations shared with friends who had become family. Life's pace slowed in a way that invited reflection rather than regret. My days were filled with simple routines that brought stability and joy. Mornings began with the ritual of brewing coffee, the aroma filling my modest apartment and stirring memories of Marion. Though the ache of her absence never fully faded, it transformed into a gentle presence that warmed my heart rather than weighed it down. In the afternoons, I tended to my balcony garden, nurturing the flowers and herbs that flourished under my care. Watching new buds emerge and blooms unfold became a metaphor for my own growth, a living testament to resilience and renewal. The garden connected me to the cycles of life and reminded me that even after the harshest winters, spring inevitably arrives. Social connections blossomed as well. The community center remained a cornerstone of my life, a place where laughter echoed and stories intertwined. We celebrated birthdays, shared meals, and supported one another through challenges. These relationships, forged through shared experience and genuine care, filled the spaces left by those who had drifted away. Technology continued to bridge distances. Video calls with grandchildren became treasured occasions, moments when voices and smiles crossed miles to warm my soul. Though Ruth's involvement was limited, these brief glimpses of family sustained me and offered hope that connection, however fragile, still endured. Health remained a priority. I embraced gentle exercise, mindful eating, and regular medical checkups, recognizing that self-care was an essential act of respect toward the life I still had to live. With each passing day, I grew stronger, not just in body but in spirit. Reflection became a regular companion. I often revisited my journals, reading words penned in moments of struggle and triumph. They traced a journey from despair to empowerment, a testament to the human capacity for healing and transformation. The story of being abandoned, betrayed, and forced to fight back no longer defined me. Instead, it became a chapter in a larger narrative, one of courage, self-discovery, and the unwavering pursuit of peace. As the sun set on each day, I felt a deep gratitude. Gratitude for survival, for new beginnings, and for the chance to live life on my own terms. And with that gratitude came hope, a hope that the future, no matter what it held, would be met with an open heart and steady hands. Seasons continued their steady turn, painting the world outside with vibrant colors and gentle whispers of change. Inside, my life unfolded with a quiet richness that surprised me. The loneliness that had once threatened to swallow me whole had softened into a companionable solitude, a space where I could breathe and be myself without fear or expectation. I took pleasure in the mundane, the rhythmic ticking of the clock, the soft hum of the radio playing old jazz tunes, the comforting feel of a well-worn chair beneath me. These simple pleasures stitched together a tapestry of peace I hadn't thought possible after so much turmoil. My relationships, though few, were genuine and deep. I found joy in conversations that lingered over cups of tea, in the shared smiles of neighbors I greeted on morning walks, and in the quiet understanding of friends who had walked their own hard roads. Together, we created a small community, bound not by blood but by shared humanity. Though my family story remained fractured, I learned to hold it gently. The pain of betrayal no longer dominated my thoughts. Instead, it served as a reminder of my strength and the value of self-respect. I forgave not to forget but to free myself from the chains of bitterness. Travel became a renewed passion. I visited places Marion and I had dreamed of, small towns with cobblestone streets, quiet beaches where the ocean whispered stories, and mountain trails bathed in golden light. Each journey was a celebration of life, a reclamation of freedom and joy. I embraced learning with enthusiasm. Books, courses, and even simple conversations fed a curious mind eager to grow. The world, vast and intricate, offered endless wonders to explore and understand. Health challenges came and went, but I met them with resilience. The doctor's visits became less about fear and more about stewardship, caring for the vessel that carried me through decades of experiences, both harsh and beautiful. Every night as I closed my eyes, I felt gratitude, a profound thankfulness for the chance to continue, to grow, and to find meaning in unexpected places. The man who had once been left alone on a trip had become a man who stood firmly on his own ground, steady, hopeful, and unafraid to embrace the chapters yet unwritten. The passage of time brought new rhythms to my life. Mornings were no longer filled with dread, but with quiet anticipation of what the day might hold. I learned to cherish the simple blessings: warm sunlight through the window, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the soft murmur of distant conversations carried on the breeze. I continued to deepen the friendships that had become my chosen family. Together, we shared stories of past hardships and future dreams. We supported one another through health scares, celebrated birthdays, and found comfort in shared silences. These connections reminded me that belonging is found not just in blood ties, but in genuine presence. At times, I found myself reflecting on the twists and turns of my journey: the loss of Marion, the betrayal by Ruth and Dennis, the struggle to reclaim my life. These memories no longer overwhelmed me but served as milestones marking how far I had come. Writing remained a source of solace. My journals, once filled with raw pain and confusion, now captured moments of clarity, gratitude, and hope. They became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a record of a man who refused to be defined by loss. I pursued new interests as well, learning to play the guitar, attending local art classes, and volunteering for causes that resonated with me. Each endeavor was a step toward rediscovery, an embrace of life's endless possibilities. Though I still missed family, I understood that sometimes love means letting go. I chose to focus on the present, on nurturing the life I was building, and on opening my heart to new experiences and relationships. Health challenges persisted, but I met them with determination and acceptance. I made peace with aging, viewing it not as a decline but as a chapter rich with wisdom and grace. As the years unfurled, I found myself not just surviving but truly living, grateful for each breath, each connection, each moment of peace. The man who had once been abandoned on a trip was now a man fully alive, carrying forward with strength, dignity, and an unshakable hope for the future.